133 downstate police and fire pensions grew to roughly 650, each with different managers and different actuaries and different staff. And today, Illinois has the second highest number of pension systems in the nation.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel.
Jeff Berkowitz here on November 16th, the big day. This is 10 days before the famous Tom Seraphin Associates Party. Jeff Berkowitz in Chicago, Seraphin Associates in Chicago, and coming right up after that, because it's Seraphin's party is always 2 days before Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Early happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. And Jeff and I won't try to act like turkeys today. So we are going to be revisiting what's happened this past week in Springfield and around the state. But specifically, we're going to start off with a discussion of some of the items that happened in the state veto session. And Jeff, one of the big things that did happen is the governor got some movement on the pension consolidation, in which 652 different pension plans of fire and police downstate were consolidated, or will be consolidated, into just two, one for the police and one for the firemen.
Well, you could say it's the only significant item. There are critics who will say that even that's not very significant. But everything else basically flopped or got watered down or nothing. This was an extravagant waste of money and time to bring all these folks here for nothing. Big time failure. You know, Lightfoot, for nothing, okay, zero. I mean, seriously, she is a rookie, but I'm sure she anticipated much, much more, right?
Well, I think she did. She came down and spoke trying to get relief on the taxes that are being applied to the Chicago casino, because as we've discussed before, they're so high that really no one's going to want to take on running a Chicago casino. The tax that's going to be applied in the city of Chicago is something in the 70% level, and so after you pay all your running expenses, you're going to come up with maybe a profit margin of 1 to 2% if you watch all your other costs carefully. And people are just not going to put the amount of money behind a casino that they need to have a 1 to 2% profit, maybe. So she was trying to get that reduced. That was one of her big items. And the other thing was the transfer tax on real estate, in which it was going to be a progressive tax where the higher the real estate, the higher the tax would have been, with a top line of 2.25%. Unfortunately for the mayor, she struck out on both points.
Yeah, you know, people were critical before and said she really hadn't worked the room, so to speak, worked the Capitol to do the preliminaries to get this to pass. You can't just go down there as she did for a day. I mean, you got to work that place for, weeks before, right? You got to be on the phone. Maybe she was, but people in the know say didn't think she and her aides were really doing it. I mean, that for $50 million, which that progressive income tax was important to her because she was counting on that for $50 million for her carrying a small part
of her budget was $838 million.
Right, so it's only $50 million, but as Ev Dirksen used to say, 50 million here, 50 million there, and before you know it, you're talking real money. Although he said billions. But any case,
let's start off though. Go back to the pension consolidation, because that was the big news. There wasn't a whole lot of other things happening. It was We're going to talk about what didn't happen, as we were just alluding to. But the governor did get this passed, and he noted in his comments that pension consolidation had been talked about in the legislature going back to 1947, and so he was happy to take the bow for getting this done. And let's listen to some of the comments that he made about why this matters following the vote in the Senate.
133 downstate police and fire pensions grew to roughly 650, each with different managers and different actuaries and different staff. And today, Illinois has the second highest number of pension systems in the nation. Over the years, there have been many attempts to get this done, always thwarted. But the core concept of consolidation remained. because it makes so much sense. The consolidation of these into two funds could result into greater returns of $820 million to $2.5 billion just over the next 5 years, and more after that. They could earn billions over the next 20 years. What we celebrate here is truly monumental. One of the most critical long-term challenges that we face in Illinois is our underfunded pension liabilities and the surging property tax burdens that they create.
So the governor was talking about how getting those pensions under control will not only add to the return, as you heard him say there, on what the fire and police get on their money, but he's also saying that that is part of his addressing the issue of the high property taxes, because he said, you know, the more that the state can make, or the pensions can make, the less that they have to go to the taxpayers to make up those pension losses. He's hoping the market forces. And by the way, on Friday, the market hit an all-time high of 28,000 on the Dow. So if the markets are going to keep going, and that's a big if, well, then it might make a difference, Jeff.
Well, I think he was a bit excessive in his praise of his own bill, to be fair. Look, it's a good bill. It should have been done a long time ago, but it'll make a very, very small dent in the major problem facing the state of Illinois, which is their excessively generous pensions, which in part led to excessively underfunded. The problem of Illinois is the state of Illinois has an unfunded pension hole of about $270 billion. And the city of Chicago, which is a major part, obviously, of Illinois, major part of the economic growth, has a unfunded pension hole of about $70 billion. 270 and 70, we're up to about $1/3 trillion. This is a pittance. Number one, it doesn't touch Chicago, doesn't touch the state of Illinois pensions. It's everything downstate or everything other than Chicago. That's number one. So yes, it'll make it a little better. At best, it might raise the rate of return on those pensions by 2 points. Might be by 1, might be by 3, we'll see. But that ain't going to cure their problems, and their problems are a small pittance of the problems I just mentioned. And 2, the real estate taxes that are high around the state of Illinois, that ain't the reason. That is like wildly deceptive. On the North Shore, for instance, and many other affluent areas, your real estate property taxes, 70% comes from education spending, local spending, okay? Around the state, they may get more state aid. But the property tax, whoa, that's a whopper. That just is not, this ain't gonna do much of anything. If you wanna address the property tax problem, hey, Terry, we could do a whole show on that, right? But
well, we could and probably should, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that was really deceptive. We'd love to have the governor here to go back and forth on that one, because we'd like to see what he'd say in response to me.
Along the lines, I was going to say along the lines of what you're saying, and yes, the market has gone up. In fact, we recently set an all-time record as far as the length of the bull market without a major correction. But we did talk to financial analyst Ted Dabrowski of WirePoints earlier in the week to get his reaction after this consolidation bill passed. Let's take a listen to what Ted's analysis was.
These pension funds we're talking about only make up about 4.5% of the entire pension debts and retirement debts that Chicago and Illinois are on the hook for. So it's a small amount. So when Governor Pritzker called it momentous, I think that's a huge overreach. Number 2, they might get higher returns, but it's not a guarantee. We don't know just because you pull money together whether the pension funds will actually do better or not, especially given where we are in the stock market. Stock markets could fall and returns could be worse. But really, I think the bigger issue that has not been discussed was that inside of this consolidation bill, it's no longer just a consolidation bill. It also became a bill to increase benefits for Tier 2 workers in the police and fire funds. And those Tier 2 workers are those workers hired after January of 2011.
So as kind of along the lines of you said, Jeff, Mr. Dabrowski thought that this, while a good effort, and I'm sure, as the governor said, it was very difficult to make this happen. You know, it's not, with all the entrenched interests there are around the state, everyone having their own little fiefdom, it's not easy to move the, you know, the ball down the field. But as Ted just said, and as you said, unfortunately, while this might be an improvement, the advantage is marginal in the big scope of things.
All right, we got a lot of other topics, so let's run through the rest of veto session or other topics maybe in a minute. Let's try to do that. You know, as we said, the mayor did not get her progressive real estate transfer tax, basically a home sales tax. More good, and give her a net $50 million increase. That baby's gone.
Right.
Okay. The short of it, before I'll just interject here for the mayor, she had been talking a modest real estate property tax increase of $18 million. That's now gone to about 65 with that loss of $50 million there. That's a $65 million increase. The big thing on the horizon nobody's talking about, she's counting on new revenue of $163 million from these ambulance reimbursement for ambulance services for Medicaid. You know, President Trump, not too thrilled with our current mayor, Mayor Lightfoot. She's not too thrilled with him. Why does that matter? Do you think maybe Donald could put a hold a bit or suspend something on that reimbursement? Medicaid has a lot of federal stuff coming in there, and nobody's been talking much about that. That $163 million infusion of new revenue could be at risk. If that happens, now she's up to a real estate property tax of about increase of $250 million. And then she's got on the spending side, she's counting on management initiatives, zero-based budgeting. We don't know what that is. She's got 2 weeks, or at best 6 weeks, to find it. If she doesn't, that's another $250 million or so loss. Now we're up to Rahm Emanuel type property tax increase. I'm not saying that will happen, but if she's not careful on the budget stuff that I just mentioned, it could. So
yeah, I mean, here you got the budget comes up in January, and so far the mayor's kind of striking out on this new revenue. She came down to Springfield, was hoping that the veto session would give her, as we already talked about, the change in the tax rate on the casino, the proposed Chicago casino. I think she'll have to come back during the spring session, but that means a delay in making that happen, which means a delay in revenue from that. She also, as we said, didn't get the transfer tax. Let's listen to the comments of the mayor earlier in the year, about 2-3 months ago, when she said, what's going to happen if we don't get the casino tax?
But we have to be honest with ourselves. If such an agreement isn't made, if we don't secure this casino and the revenue that it creates, we will then be forced to make painful choices on finding other revenue sources. And we all know what those are, the sources we desperately wish to avoid.
The sources we desperately wish to avoid, and that's going to be more taxes on property owners, Jeff.
Yeah, you can say that again. She desperately wants to avoid that. And, you know, she wasn't counting on the casino revenue for this budget for 2020 coming up, but she was for 2021. She was looking at that as a source of revenue that might be 200, which would be 200 million maybe, that would be going toward fire and police pensions. That would be a good chunk of what she has in increases coming up, not all of it. So that's not there. Look, she should have been able, that was like a no-brainer, because the rest of the state would have benefited, because the Chicago casino would have kicked out a few hundred million to help pay for this capital project, $45 billion capital project, the so-called vertical expenditures on that. So you could have gotten a lot of people on board for the Chicago casino because they need it. I'm not saying there weren't detractors. I'm not saying it was easy, but look, she missed on the real estate tax. She missed on the casino. Two biggies, over, as they say. Okay. So what else happened? You know, the ethics, we can go through that. We'll maybe come back to that.
Well, before we go that, I mean, I want to talk, I had an opportunity to talk with State Representative LaShawn Ford, who is chairman of the Appropriations Committee on Higher Education. And we talked to LaShawn about the mayor coming down from Chicago. He's a representative from Chicago and
West side of Chicago. He's a big Chicago guy, right?
good guy.
We're-
We talked to him
Yeah.
and he gave us his opinion kind of on what is the mayor going to be faced with now.
And now one of the ways that she's talking about fixing the crisis with the Chicago's budget is a huge property tax increase, and that is not going to go over well with the people in Chicago to have such a big property tax increase. The tax that she wanted to prevent a property tax increase was a one-time deal when you buy and sell. Now she's proposing to her city council a property tax increase on homeowners, and that's going to be in the tune of like $65 million. And that's going to be painful for homeowners.
Okay.
So the homeowners may be on the hook for more taxes now that the mayor doesn't have the transfer tax, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if we're ready to go on, because the big news, Terry, the big news in Springfield, the Senate President is stepping down from the beginning of the year. That was kind of a shocker, right?
It was a shocker. People thought we were going to have the redistricting coming up after the 2020 census, and people thought he was going to be hanging on through that to be part of that, drawing it. You know, it kind of caught a number of people in the State House by surprise. It caught me by surprise, and so you know, we don't know what to make of that. It's interesting.
Yeah, but you know, what is it? The power of abhors the vacuum. They're stepping up already. I mean, everybody loved Johnny, you know, John Cullerton, good guy. That's what Bill Brady used to call. They were poker buddies, you know. He said, "Oh, my good friend Johnny," you know. But anyway, so Senate President John Cullerton, been there for like more than 4 decades. I mean, really, you want to talk an institution. And he's always said, you know, he said recently, well, in the last few years, talking about Madigan and him, he said, "Look, I've been living in the shadows of Mike Madigan for 30 years, and that ain't going to change now." He said that a few years ago. So he was important. He was a contrast to Mike Madigan. But now, who's going to replace him? Because he isn't a Mike Madigan, but that's an important position, Senate President. And I think we have something we can flash up the pictures of those who are vying to replace him already, right? There's State Senator Kimberly Lightfoot from Maywood, okay, on the left of your screen, on our left, audience left. And then we got Andy Menard from Downstate. Big guy, you know, Andy's big on,
Andy Menard, by the way, used to be chief of staff to Cullerton, so he knows how to run the Senate and is viewed positively, I would say, by the majority of people on both sides of the aisle.
And he got his funding legislation through, so he's been in the news. And then we got Don Harmon from Oak Park, who's likes to think of himself perhaps as Mr. Ethics. Of course, ethics didn't do too well, as we mentioned, may get into more in the veto session and having real substantive changes. And then we got Heather Staines, Senator Heather Staines. Look, all 4 of these people are big in what? They know how to raise money. You want to be the Senate President, you better be, and you're going to be voted for and elected. Actually, you're elected by all the senators, but most likely it will be the Democrats who will control, with virtually no impact or no input from the Republicans. But technically, they all vote for the Senate President. So there you go. And Kimberly Lightfoot, I mean, I don't want to be too blunt about this, but she is African American. She's a woman, and let's face it, those are 2 important factors in the current days. She's competent. She's been around now a fair amount of time. Maybe some would say she's more than competent. She gets along with people well. And we've mentioned about Menard and his attributes, and Harmon. Don's liked by a lot of folks, and he also understands how things work. And he's a big fundraiser guy, as is Heather Staines and the Staines Foundation. So what have I missed there, Terry?
You know, the one thing is Menard is the one downstater, comes from a small town in central Illinois, but he was also the primary author of the new education funding formula. Again, he used to be on Cullerton's chief of staff. So Don Harmon, on the other hand, plays bass guitar and plays occasionally on a what's called the Boathouse Caucus with former state Representative Chad Hayes and former state Representative Mike Tyron, both Republicans. So Harmon has talked about how he has gone down and spent the weekend with Chad Hayes when they played down there, and how important it is to know, go around the state and get to know people. So he's not a downstater, but he has talked about the significance of that for what it's worth.
Yeah, and there's some dark horses there. There's Senator Melinda Bush, hasn't been around that long, but she's maybe throwing her hat in the ring. There's downstate, there's Senator Dave Kohler. And so it may be important the downstate upstate vote. If more upstaters are splitting that vote, maybe a downstater can sneak in there. But this won't be decided till the first or second week in January. There'll be a lot of jockeying over the holidays, so we'll revisit this subject. But unless you got something, I think we're ready to go on to topic 3.
I think we're ready to move on.
All right, this is the big news. We said the Cullerton name was the big news. Big news, really? Before that, Mike McLean's phone was tapped. Yeah, you might say, who's Mike McLean? Why does that matter? He's been big-time lobbyist for ComEd for many years. He's downstate in Quincy. Most importantly, big-time confidant of Speaker Mike Madigan. It is said that when the Speaker wants somebody to speak about
When you say he's been popped, what does that mean?
He's been tapped. He's been
Tapped,
his cell phone
as
been
far
tapped.
as
Sorry.
tapped for election, tapped for to be pope? No, he's been tapped by who?
Wiretapped.
Wiretapped.
Wiretapped by the feds. Yeah, and it's a big deal when you're wiretapped. You got to get, basically that goes back to Washington to authorizing that, and then they monitor it closely. Yeah, they don't really allow you just to sort of sit on the line and just get into that phone. So the point is, if Speaker Mike Madigan's very close to Mike McLean.
They're friends, and the other thing I would say that people should understand is McLean retired like 2 years ago. So
Right.
that's also what's interesting. He was a longtime lobbyist, but he's not a lobbyist anymore.
Well, in Springfield, it's kind of like the mob. You can't really retire from the mob. You can't retire from Springfield. These guys can't resist. They always have their fingers in it, right? I mean, look at Cullerton 71, and it's going to be hard for him to step away. What is Madigan pushing 77? These guys love it. It's not just a job there, right, Terry? So the point is, maybe he's retired, maybe he isn't. The point is, he's still been a player.
Well, he's not around the Capitol
feds-
anymore, but it's reported, and I think we had talked about that Speaker Madigan in the past still likes to pick up the phone and talk to him, which of course you would do as friends. But I think apparently the Speaker is reported to trust his judgment. Why someone would, what's happening, Jeff, is we see these investigations going on, and no one that I know can quite make it out. I mean, there's speculation galore, as you can imagine, but we have any number of people from Terry Link reportedly wearing a wire that got Representative Luis Arroyo on tape offering a bribe. Arroyo then resigned.
Arroyo's arrested and indicted on bribery charges, a lot apparently based on that wiretap conversation, or wire that he was wearing and got him. But look, it's been a broad-based disparate investigation. They're touching a lot of different things. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois, with Chicago, John Lausch, okay? I mean, going months ago, earlier in the year, with Alderman Burke, chairman of the Finance Committee, that was like, the allegation there is a typical shakedown, okay? We know about that. Danny Solis, was wearing that wire for several years, Alderman Danny Solis. Harry Austin had some perhaps favors for, buying a house from the government. So I'm just giving you folks an idea. When you say, what is going on here? What are they looking for? Well, these are different investigations that many times touch different issues.
Well, and we also had Anne Pramaggiore, the head of ComEd, resign from her post, which is, so are there strings attaching all these together? Is there something where,
because,
we're looking like outside the window and seeing little examples of what's happening, but the only people I suppose that really know what's going on are in the federal prosecutor's office.
Right. The Chicago Tribune has been all over this story, and a lot of work saying, thanks to hat tip to the Chicago Tribune, because they've been reporting a lot of this, especially in the last week or so, about the McLean phone tap and so forth. And as you say, Anne Pramaggiore, 20 years ago, she was recruited into ComEd from McDermott, Will and Emery, a great law firm, and she was like a 6-year associate. She rose through the ranks rapidly to be head of the law department, and then over on the business side, with running ComEd, and more recently, before stepping down, running all of Exxon utilities.
Yeah, she was a big player.
Other states.
Right.
Big, 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 big.
Well, look, one of the things that came out is when Representative Arroyo resigned, is that it turned out that he was a lobbyist, which shocked a lot of people. There were a lot of people in the state legislature that said, I didn't know you could be a lobbyist while you are an office holder. And at the press conference, when the governor spoke about the pension consolidation, he was asked about what he wants to see as far as tightening up the ethics bill. Also, the Republicans early in the week talked about wanting to have an ethics bill. So look, this would come in the spring session, a big move to make ethics reform, tighten down on some of these things that people can do. Here's what some of the things the governor said he's looking for.
A merger of the databases so that people can actually see who the lobbyists are, what their statement of economic interests that are being submitted by lobbyists and by legislators, the lobbyist lobbyist registration database, and the contributions. Right now, you can't find those things in one place. They ought to be available and transparent to all of you and to the public. A second thing is disclosure of subcontractors to lobbyists, people who are lobbying, but then when you look them up, it only shows which lobbyists they're working for, not which companies they're lobbying on behalf of. We need to change that. We need to make sure we know who those lobbyists are really working for. A third is that lobbyists have to reveal if they serve as elected officials or appointed officials at any level of government. That's an important thing for the public to know. And we have expanded a disclosure in the statement of economic interest itself.
Okay, so the short of it is he talked about all things that need to be done that he wants done. There was some ethics legislation coming out of the veto session, but most would say it was baby steps, okay? It was stuff like, okay, before when you were a lobbyist and the lobbyist had subcontracted out to somebody and that guy was lobbying and he didn't say who the actual client was, now he has to report that client, okay? Stuff like that. No major expansion of the reporting requirements about how much money you're getting, because look, somebody can retain you as a lobbyist and then you have to, in the city of Chicago, register there, and you might have to tell the city of Chicago how much you're getting paid as a lobbyist, but you don't have to say how much you're getting paid as a consultant. You don't have to say in the state how much you're getting paid anywhere. They didn't expand the economic interest. We don't have time to go into it. Baby steps. This ain't done nothing, okay? And the other thing to note, as we were saying about this, nobody really knows what it's about. As you said, the feds know what this investigation is about. We do know that Senator Sandoval, is being widely investigated. When we look at the subpoenas that go out, they're looking for communications with Sandoval and others. You put the pieces together, there are people speculating, Tribune writing about it, as to the relationship between Sandoval and other senators and the Capital Fund, that $45 billion project. But then they come back to Exelon, and people say, Exelon got a lot of legislation in the last decade past. And they gave out a lot of money that we know of. And then there was a lot of money that went to somebody, some people, and they got the money and they may have given it to people, so it avoided reporting. We don't know. And we do know this. If you want legislation passed in Illinois, you want to be big on making contributions, and Exelon.
Well, and that's true. That's true in every state. And by the way, we want to make sure everyone has the presumption of innocence. Right. Jeff, we want to make sure we're going to be coming short on time.
Yeah, it's line drawing, Terry. You just can't step over the line. And with that, I think we're done.